Everyone, we're going to get started. I know we're waiting for some people, but really appreciate you coming for what is really a timely discussion on extreme weather and how to ensure we don't have an economic meltdown when it comes to extreme weather circumstances. The session is being recorded, so we're going to send it out to our political representatives as well as to media. I'm Anita Huberman. I'm President and CEO of the Surrey Board of Trade. And I'd like to acknowledge that we are on the traditional and unceded territory of our Coast Salish peoples, specifically the Kwantlen, Katzie, Semiahmoo, Tawasin, Kaikut, Coquitlam, and our Inuit and Métis peoples. They have a profound connection to the land and water that surrounds our great city of Surrey. So, as I mentioned, it really is about focusing on extreme weather, how we can work together with all levels of government to create solutions to ensure that people can still work, that the economy can still continue to move in events like snow that we may have tonight. Fire, heat, floods, all of those natural disasters, even an earthquake. And our sponsors, they understand that this is a very important topic. So just a round of applause for our community sponsor, Fortis BC. Our Progress partners, these are ongoing sponsors for the Surrey Board of Trade, our Chambers of Commerce Group Insurance Plan represented by SNF Benefits, the law firm of Fasken, and Western Community College. A round of applause for them, please. So everyone, I just wanted to ensure that every speaker is going to provide their perspective. This is meant to be a roundtable dialogue that will feed into the advocacy agenda of the Surrey Board of Trade, and more importantly into our environment and infrastructure team, into our international and industry team at the Surrey Board of Trade to get further feedback and advice into eventual policy and dialogue with different levels of government. So today, I'd like to welcome, first of all, I'm going to welcome each of them. Jonathan Johannes, Director, Engineering Operations from the City of Surrey. Please, a round of applause. Dr. Andrian Doyen, Assistant Professor and Director of the Planning Program from Simon Fraser University. And Betsy Agar, Director, Buildings from the Pemet Institute. So everyone, they're going to speak in turn, and I encourage you to take notes, any questions you have, because we're going to have a bit of a roundtable dialogue after each speaker has spoken. So first of all, we will go to our friend from the City of Surrey. Over to you. Betsy first. I apologize.
Do my usual short person adjustment here. Thanks, everybody, and thanks for the introduction, Anita. My name is Betsy Agar. I am the Buildings Director at the Pemet Institute. I need to fix this so that I can see my notes. We go. It is my pleasure to speak to you today about the risks that our buildings are facing in this changing climate. I wanted to start off with really kind of grounding us in how serious this problem is. We know that we've faced extreme storms in the past, but not to the how extreme they're hitting us now and to the frequency that they're hitting us. And so this is influencing, the cost of owning our homes and our buildings. And we want to think about what we can do and how to maximize our actions or the benefits of our actions if we're going to, make sure that they're resilient in the future for both the assets' sake as well as the occupants'. Just quickly on Pemet Institute, we are a national donor-funded clean energy think tank. We work in climate policy, in oil and gas, in clean electricity, in renewables, but also in sustainable jobs and decarbonizing buildings as well as transportation. We do have offices across the country, and I'm located in Vancouver, the home to Musqueam, Squamish, and Coast Salish peoples. We know without a doubt that our buildings are contributing to climate change, burning fossil fuels for our heating, as well as the embodied carbon that goes into the buildings before they even are built, is all contributing to our changing climate. And in some cities, the buildings can emit as much as 65% of their annual emissions. We also know that 2/3 to 3/4 of the buildings that exist today will still be in existence in 2050. And the Pemet Institute has estimated that in order for us to meet our federal climate emissions reductions targets by 2050, we need to be retrofitting and electrifying homes at a rate of 600,000 units per year. And commercial space, we need to be retrofitting at a rate of 32 square meters per year, or 32 million square meters per year. So what we're really coming to realize is that we can maximize that return on those investments by factoring in more than just the energy cost savings. And this may be as much about loss prevention as it is about asset value. So according to the Insurance Institute of Canada, severe weather claims paid by the insurance industry in Canada has doubled every 5 to 10 years since the 1980s. And 2020, we saw losses 20 times higher than in the 1980s. So just to sort of ground us in how serious this is, I thought we'd take a look at some of Canada's top 10 weather stories of 2023. In the interest of time, I'm going to skim through some, but I'll stop and pause a little bit on the BC ones. First off, 2023, NRC is predicting it'll likely be the warmest year in possibly 125,000 years. Warm coastal waters resulted in the hottest ever marine heat wave in Canada. Last year, more than 250,000 Canadians were directly impacted by fires and floods, some more than once, and almost 90% of the alert-ready warnings were for wildfire and weather hazards. The top 10, the 10th one was a tornado in Alberta. It tossed around a 10-ton combine. There were $330 million in insurance losses due to 5 Quebec storms in just the month of July alone. And we saw cold spells in the middle of a warm year, 3 to 6 degrees above normal in January from Alberta all the way through to Newfoundland, Labrador. In the same year, Vancouver got snow 6 months in a row, from November to April, for the first time in 100 years of recorded history. In 2023, Western Canada had too little precipitation, and Eastern Canada had too much. Drought, number 5 is noted as the drought across Canada. At the beginning of June, drought stretched from coast to coast in every province or territory. In BC, less than half of normal precipitation. That's what we saw for 10 months. By mid-August, more than 80% of the province had reached the 2 highest and worst possible drought rankings. Communities were declaring states of emergency, restricting water. Ranchers were selling cattle prematurely because they couldn't feed them. The province's power generating sector had the lowest production in 15 years. And there was a massive die-off of steelhead trout and salmon due to oxygen-depleted warm waters. Nova Scotia saw floods. Number 3, we have the hottest summer on Earth and in Canada. It featured the Earth's warmest first 9 months on record, and it's expected to be very likely the warmest year on record in more than 150 years. And number 2 was the smoke, which got us famous, not just here, but in the US as well as far as Europe. And the root cause of these smoke hours, record wildfires. 2023 was the worst wildfire year on record. 18 hectares was burned. That's 7 times the 10-year average. It's 1.5 times the size of the maritime provinces together, more than the total area burned in the US in the last 5 years, which was 15 hectares. June 6, out-of-control fires were burning in almost every province and territory. By October of last year, less than 6 months ago, there were 317 active fires still burning. And zombie fires, that's a new term, are cropping up already this year from underground root fires, and perhaps you've heard, but in Chetwynd, there's already an out-of-control fire, and we're not even out of February. From December 2022 to November 2023, the Catastrophe Indices and Quantification Incorporated identified 27 major weather events with insured losses of at least $30 million each, totaling over $3.1 billion in insured losses. But the insured industry's costs represent only a fraction of the total cost to properties, businesses, infrastructure, and really the social impacts. So as I said, this weather's not new. What's new is how extreme it is and how often it is that we're seeing it. With all these risks in mind, the buildings team at Pemet Institute created the Reframed initiative with our partners, as you can see on this slide. In addition to these, there are also 3 housing societies who own buildings that went through the Reframed lab process. And Fortis BC is funding a deep retrofit of one of the buildings as part of their deep retrofit pilot program. So in our theory of change, deep retrofits really offer a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to make existing buildings not just energy efficient, not even just carbon, emitting less carbon, but also as an opportunity to be thoughtful about filtering out pathogens and pollution, to be more resilient to shocks like floods or power outages and ready for extreme weather. And we can also be starting to think about buildings and retrofitting so that they can be effective hubs in a more resilient energy system. Some examples of deep retrofit solutions can include passive components, such as the building envelope. This is buildings, the doors, the windows, the roofs, the walls, to seal out smoke and also to seal out the extreme temperatures of extreme weather, as well as mechanical components that can provide fresh air, heating and cooling even in extreme heat and smoke events. But if there are any asset planners listening to this, we know that changes in one system can lead to changes in other systems, and yet asset renewal tends to be piecemeal because different components come to the end of their lives at different times. So building retrofits really need to be planned and implemented thoughtfully so that we can optimize that full value of the building components, but also so that we can ready our buildings for climate impacts that we know are already here. We are seeing buildings that are changing already. There's growing demand for climate-related financial and risk information by investors, insurers. As we've just seen, recovering from extreme events can be extremely expensive. There's concern that climate change may make insurance unaffordable, and we know there are areas of BC where it's not even available for certain risks. And many are calling for risk disclosure for investments. We're also seeing leadership in the real estate sector, in part because to prepare for unexpected losses and costs. So we're anticipating that properties will be valued less if they are not prepared for extreme weather. And utility costs are also rising faster than the consumer price index. But more immediately and perhaps better understood since COVID-19 started, is it 4 long years ago? We also need to be retrofitting for human health and safety and their resilience. 30 years ago, I was practicing as a building science engineer in Ontario. There was no one interested in ventilation or how to insulate our buildings or seal them off. And we are in a moment where people understand better than ever, thanks to COVID, the importance of ventilation and making sure that we can have fresh air even in weather events like extreme weather. So indoor air can have as high or higher pollution than outdoor air. So we all know about sick building syndrome, for example. It can aggravate respiratory diseases like asthma and allergies. And with increasing storms and smoke events, people understand the value of homes and buildings that stay warm during a power outage in the middle of winter, but that can keep smoke out while maintaining safe indoor temperatures, and that can really withstand increasingly extreme and frequent weather. So I'm asking this question: is there really a split incentive anymore when human health and lives are at risk? We need to really rethink how buildings and retrofits are valued, and we need to be looking beyond short-term returns on investment. The last thing I want to talk about is government policy that's driving climate action to both slow climate change and protect against it. We know that the federal carbon price will climb until it reaches $170 by 2030. We're expecting the Canada Green Building Strategy to come out in the spring. We have a national adaptation strategy out now, which is going to be continually reiterated to adjust to what we learn while we implement it. And in BC, Clean BC is where we would find the bundle of policies and regulations being introduced. So I want to flag that Climate Proof Canada is a leading coalition of insurance industry representatives, municipal governments, Indigenous organizations, environmental NGOs, and research organizations. They include both the Surrey Board of Trade as well as the Pemet Institute as partners. And it's organized by the Insurance Bureau of Canada, which I think should be notable. The coalition submitted recommendations for development for that national adaptation strategy. Essentially high level, it's for climate-proof housing, building resilient infrastructure, building Indigenous resilience, and making sure that we're adapting to extreme heat. So for buildings, that means integrating resilience measures in codes and standards by 2026, accelerating retrofits and integrating a resilient retrofits program, developing a home adaptation rating system, so a little bit like you might see an EnerGuide, but for how resilient we are to extreme weather. Establishing a national flood insurance program, funding research on the link between climate change, severe weather events, and health outcomes, as well as funding resilience retrofits for community buildings. And we're starting to see regulations being implemented that were promised when Clean BC was first developed. I want to briefly highlight the highest efficiency equipment standard. This is a fuel neutral regulation that would require heating equipment to be at least 100% efficient. So that means electric resistance heating as well as heat pumps. Again, heat pumps can be powered by different energy systems. Building codes will be starting to incorporate resilience measures. This includes what the much anticipated alterations to existing buildings. We also have the zero carbon step code being introduced. The encouraging thing about the zero carbon step code is in municipalities that are tracking their building permits really well, they're finding that builders that are already building to step 3 or higher are already meeting those higher levels of zero carbon step code. So it's not as far out of reach as it may sometimes feel. The GHG Reduction Standard for natural gas, or it's kind of affectionately known as the emissions cap. This enables us, it triangulates with this highest efficiency equipment standard. So it's allowing these equipment standards to be fuel neutral as long as that fuel will also allow us to meet those carbon targets. And lastly, I want to talk about the maximum indoor temperatures, which we're seeing municipalities start to set, and also we can anticipate that those will enter the building codes and standards. So essentially, to sum up, buildings and climate are tightly integrated. Buildings contribute to climate change, they're impacted by climate change, and they're meant to be protecting us against the impacts of climate change. And I just want to say it's time for us to be rethinking how we value them and why we would, and the motivations behind carrying out deep retrofits in order to ready us for coming climate change. Thank you.
Great, thank you. I want to say I just met Betsy today, but our presentations are so well aligned that this is fabulous. Well done on planning this. So something that I've been thinking about a lot recently is what we define as a problem. And the idea that if something's a problem, we tend to create policies or programs to respond to them. And if they're not a problem, we don't. So I'd really like everyone to think about what problems have remained largely hidden or unaddressed. And thinking about that in relation to extreme weather, in relation to climate change, which, as Betsy sort of has reminded us, is leading to more extreme and more frequent extreme weather events. So what has largely remained hidden or unaddressed? And I'll provide an example. These are two quotes. I'm an academic, so of course I'm going to cite some other academic papers, but this is the only one. Basically, winter mortality is greater in countries with milder climates than those with more severe weather conditions. This suggests that countries with milder winters often have homes. This is particularly sort of thinking about one of the reasons why those high mortalities is that the homes are not sort of built for those sort of more extreme temperatures. So particularly they have poor thermal efficiency. And so it becomes harder to heat these poorly insulated homes in sort of the more extreme climates that we're experiencing. In Australia, cold housing is not recognized as a problem. That occurs because Australia is seen as a mild climate country. But the truth is more people die from cold weather in Australia than they do in Sweden. It's one of the highest sort of causes of mortality when we're thinking about extreme weather. So in Australia, cold is not seen as a problem. And because cold is not seen as a problem, people are losing their lives, and they're continuing to build poor quality homes. So I want us to ask that question again. What problems have remained largely unhidden and unaddressed? We can think about that here in Surrey and here in the Lower Mainland. How has something like heat not been identified as a problem? An area of research that I work on is looking at planning for extreme heat. As early as 2017, the BC Centre for Disease Control put out a report looking at the ways in which BC was preparing for climate change and looking at adaptation. They found that across municipalities, most municipalities were not preparing for heat and not recognizing heat as a threat. And yet, it has been. In 2021, when we experienced the heat dome, particularly across the Pacific Northwest, BC was the hardest hit out of Oregon and Washington. 80% of the lives lost during the heat dome occurred in BC. 98% of those deaths occurred in homes. So are we now at a point that we might consider heat to be a problem? I think we are, but I think the challenge of the way that we're problematizing heat is that it's been primarily focused on a public health response, so an immediate response. We're thinking there's going to be a heat wave next week. Let's open up some cooling centers. Let's make sure there's some public education campaigns. Let's make sure that people sort of know what services are available to them. Or it's emergency response, same thing, an immediate event. We think about sort of climate impacts and extreme weather often in terms of shocks and stressors. Shocks are these sort of one-time immediate things, and stressors are something that are kind of like those ongoing slow burns. Heat is both. And yet we've been dealing with heat more recently in the last few years as a shock, and yet it really is a stressor. It's something that we're going to continue to see. During the 2021 heat dome, I did a lot of media where people were really interested in thinking about, well, what do we need to do? And one of the things that was talked about, and one of the things I talked about, is that we're going to keep seeing heat. And people were like, oh, I don't know about that. The two subsequent summers, we had heat waves, something that BC, in particular the Lower Mainland, the BC South Coast, had not experienced. So now heat waves are on our radar. We now know that they're going to probably happen every year. And yet, have we changed the way that we problematize heat? I would really like us to think about how our response to heat actually needs to be more long-term. So I'm a planner by training, and so I'm particularly interested in sort of that strategic long-range thinking and how we're retrofitting our buildings to respond to extreme temperatures, but also how we're retrofitting our neighborhoods. Is the built environment that we have resilient to extreme weather? The answer is currently not really. So we need to be thinking about our built environments, we need to be thinking about our natural environments, and we need to be thinking about how they all connect together and how we are thinking longer term. So my hope is that in 10 years from now, we are better prepared for the heat waves that we will experience every summer than we have been for the past couple years. So what does that look like? And we can think about other challenges like the cold. We live in a sort of pretty temperate climate here, and yet, not that long ago, we experienced -10. That's really cold for Vancouver. And again, Vancouver as the region. We had buildings pipe burst. We had systems not being able to work. And why is that? Because we don't problematize cold. Cold's not a problem for us in the Lower Mainland. Other places in Canada know very well how to deal with cold. Cold is a problem. The building codes, the way the buildings are built, the infrastructure, but also even the community connections. People know how to survive. So I'm not from BC, so I grew up in cold, and I feel like anyone else who didn't grow up in Vancouver continues to laugh at everyone here. We're like, why don't you sort of know how to do this? But again, it's not been a problem. Snow has not been a problem. I'm sure many of you have seen the stats that have come out every time it snows, probably going to come out in the news again either tonight or tomorrow. Vancouver spends the least amount on snow removal as any major Canadian city. And for a really long time, that made complete sense. Why would we spend money on all that? It's something that we don't need to deal with very often. Now we're dealing with it more often. So what's our response? How are we going to see snow as a problem? I think snow removal is definitely sort of something that's come up a lot, but also the connections and relationships between cities. One of the things we've experienced, right, is that snow removal might happen in one city and not in the other at the same time, or bridges get left out because they fall under another jurisdiction. So what are sort of more coordinated approaches that we need to be thinking about when we're thinking about something like rain? Vancouver's always had lots of rain, and yet the rain is different. We're actually experiencing different types of rain, where now the rain is more intense than it has been previously, which leads to flooding. But we're also experiencing more periods of extreme drought. So we're experiencing, I'd say, water, maybe better than rain, really differently than we have previously. So I think while we thought of maybe rain's the one thing that we have thought of as a problem here, that problem's changing. And are we changing as that problem continues to evolve? And then the one that I forgot to put on here, but I'll say it now, is fire. So I lived in Vancouver for 10 years, and then I moved away for 7 years, and then I came back. In those first 10 years that I lived here, air quality and fire were never an issue. Every summer was just beautiful. People would always say, how do you put up with the rain? When you're like, because the summers are gorgeous. And when I came back, the new reality of summers in Vancouver had to do with smoke and air quality. And so again, has the way we thought about fire changed, particularly I think in places like Surrey, where we might not be worried about fires in our backyard, but we need to worry about the impacts of those fires, particularly from an air quality perspective. But I think as well in terms of how that's impacting the different systems that we're connected to, be they transportation or other sort of goods and services that need to sort of arrive or leave here. So in your own sort of, I think, sectors, in your own works, in your own organizations, what problems have largely remained hidden or unaddressed? And what needs to change as we are sort of experiencing more extreme weather events and as we prepare for more of these and different sort of versions of these in the future? I like to think of this question, again, what do we consider to be a problem in terms of thinking about infrastructure? And in particular, I'm interested as well in how we define critical infrastructure. So currently within Canada, critical infrastructure is defined as assets, systems, and networks that provide functions necessary for our way of life. They are considered essential by governments for the functioning of a society and economy and deserving a special protection for national security. These asset systems and networks can be standalone or interconnected with interdependent within and across provinces, territories, and national borders, and I'll also sort of say across municipal borders as well. So these are essential to the function of society. They are essential to our economies. They are essential to how we function. And so the government deems these as deserving special protection. One thing that's not part of our suite of what we consider to be critical infrastructure is housing. And I would like us to consider that housing is, in fact, one, infrastructure. Housing is often actually not even considered to be infrastructure, but it is. It is built, it is tangible, it is physical. So therefore, I think we really need to be thinking about it as infrastructure. Housing is also essential. And I would sort of go so far as to say housing is critical infrastructure. We can think of housing in different ways. We can think of it, I also like to think of it as housing is a noun or it's a product. Again, it's the physical features, it's the things that Betsy were talking about, the importance of those deep retrofits, the importance of sort of building housing for sort of the long term and thinking about what that might mean, again, in a changing climate with more extreme weather events. It's essential. We need housing. And so therefore, if something is something that is so sort of important to how we survive as species, we really need to be thinking of housing as critical infrastructure. And if we thought of housing as critical infrastructure, it would be problematized differently. We would respond differently. And why is housing not only essential but critical? Because housing is also a verb. It's a process. It provides us with health, well-being, and safety, some of the things that sort of Betsy finished off with as being incredibly important. We need to be thinking about infrastructure that supports human health and well-being. Housing does that. We also need to be thinking about the processes and the way that housing is actually, one, a system, but also part of a system. Depending on where we live, we have access to different types of jobs, services, amenities, recreation, and so on. So it's really important to think about these sorts of things. When we're thinking of these extreme weather events, it's also important to recognize, again, the important role that housing plays. The majority of the lives lost during the heat dome occurred in housing. So that means that housing wasn't of the quality that it needs to be. During the COVID-19 pandemic, many of us changed to working from home. We could only do that if we had homes. We could only do that if our homes allowed us to do that. So we needed to have adequate housing at the very basic, but ideally higher quality housing. So folks like me were able to work at home because I had a home, but also because that home sort of provided me with the functions to do so. However, when we experience heat waves, my apartment is near unlivable. And so we need to be thinking about what sort of things do we need to support housing in these extreme weather events like hot and cold, but also thinking about the importance of housing not just for workers, but for sort of all of society, again, thinking about health and well-being. When we're thinking about the economy, we obviously need the people who work in jobs to have safe places to work, but we also be needing to think about sort of the consumers and the people who are supporting our infrastructure and are thinking about sort of those transport systems, those communication systems, manufacturing. Doesn't matter what sector of the economy you're a part of, you need to live somewhere. And so where is that going to be? So I think we need to be thinking questions of where are we putting housing, what kind of housing, and what is that quality of that housing? And what is that quality of that housing in the future? But also how do we make sure that that 2/3 of housing the existing housing that are still gonna be around in 2050 are of better quality so that people can maintain their basic functions. Again, thinking about sort of what is essential, how do we think about providing more to people, and how does that connect to all the different, again, sectors and spaces that you all work within? So I'd really like everyone to think about, again, thinking about your own lived experiences, your own organizations, your own sectors, what other assets, systems, and networks are essential for a functioning society. Today, I've offered, or I've asked you to consider housing as something that is not only infrastructure, but critical infrastructure, and particularly as a way to make housing a problem so that we respond to it. And not just housing. Right now, when we're thinking about housing, a lot of the focus is on supply. And I think it's also within sort of the urgency of needing to respond to climate change, we also need to be thinking about sort of not only the supply of housing, but sort of the type of housing and the quality of that housing for a more resilient society moving forward. But what other assets, systems, and networks are essential? What aren't we problematizing? What aren't we considering to be critical? And therefore, what isn't getting our attention that really needs our attention, that really needs government support, government policies, private sector responses, for us to be thinking and to be more resilient and more future-proof for more extreme weather events that we are only going to continue to see. Thank you.
Okay. Yep. So the two presentations that we had outlines the problems or the challenges that we face today. And those are real challenges day in and day out that we face as a city. And my presentation would deal not with how we approach these challenges on a daily basis as we see, whether it be flooding, snow-related, or heat. But I'm going to take two examples on how we try, on a bigger picture, trying to come up with a way to combat this weather-related extremes that we are having today. So almost a decade ago, the city initiated a process to address climate change and extreme weather through adaptation. So that means that preparing and adapting to the impacts of climate change, and also mitigation, which is reducing and stabilizing carbon pollution. So this was something that was in the, I would say, in the preview of the city, saying that we are a coastal city in many ways. So how can we make sure that we prepare for tomorrow and also prepare for the next 5 years, 10 years, and many more years? So the city came up with a way that to address the coastal flood through the coastal flood adaptation strategy. There were three study areas, but that affects the overall the whole city. And the process was designed to be inclusive from the outset, and was partnered with the businesses, was partnered with our First Nations, and to make sure that we are approaching holistically. How do we deal with the issue of sea level rise? How do we deal with flood? How do we adapt? And how do we proactively start looking at this before it becomes even a bigger problem? So this process started in 2016 to reduce climate change-driven coastal flood risk, and not only that now, but also into the future. And during that process, very inclusive process, there was many workshops that have had a range of strategic actions were developed to help the city's coastal communities become more resilient into the challenges. Because one of the issues is when the coastal communities are affected, businesses get affected. How our goods comes into to our city gets affected. Our rail system gets affected. So all that was put into as an input to see how can we have this strategy. And Council endorsed the final strategy in November 4, 2019. And then we went in and looked for a grant to get us the study going in. In 2019, we received a grant to prioritize and implement the outcomes of the coastal flood adaptation strategy. So just some of the highlights of the engagement that we had when we met with different communities. There were about 2,000 plus directly engaged meetings that we have had through our social medias, and to make sure that we reach a vast majority of the people. There were also co-working with our Semiahmoo First Nations to meet to make sure that they are included in the process. And there were also pop-up events throughout the city, 8 of them. There were also, we went to high schools and elementary schools to make sure that students were aware of it. And we had also some survey, including technical options and reviews, to make sure that we listen to our citizens when it comes our adaptation. How do we make sure that we are inclusive and make sure that everybody understood the risks and the also preparation or adaptation of the risks. And we looked at it from community aspect of it, the values that we incorporated, our residents. We asked the question, are people permanently displaced? And agriculture, is there a permanent loss of agricultural land? So those are the lenses that we put on as we were putting together our CFAS. When it comes to environment, are these impacts to wetlands, habitats, freshwater, fish habitat, and riparian areas? Becomes very important too, just to make sure that there is no negative impact as we continue in our journey to be resilient. Our infrastructure, how's transportation infrastructure looked at? Which area are vulnerable? And when it comes to transportation, transportation of goods and also transportation of people. The economy aspect of it, we looked into what kind of loss of business would happen if we don't have this adaptation and mitigation. Recreation, is there a diversity of recreational activity that might be impacted? And of course, culture, including our First Nations. Those are the lenses that was put together as we prepare our, within the CFAS framework. So based on that, we came up with 13 projects that needs to be funded and to work to be done. And those are what, not only that what we thought and at the engineering aspect of it, but what the community also had input and saw as necessary to make sure that our implementation included these. Then we went to our federal government and for funding. And if you remember, sometime in 2019, there was a funding that came in. The federal government put in $78 million. The city has to put our portion, a total of $186 million worth of projects that came out for this to make sure that we are resilient to the flooding and we adapt in such a way that we protect our citizens, our businesses, and our people. So those 13 projects, we've been working on them, and I'm here to say 10 of them are being completed. There are 3 more projects that are in a way to their completion. There's a deadline of 2028. The funding comes with a deadline, so we're working hard into making sure that the projects are done. And part of this adaptation program also is that the monitoring, to make sure that we have the right monitoring. And here we have, as you can see, the wave monitoring that we have installed to give us a warning ahead of time if there is an issue in a surge of waves. There is a wind monitoring also to alert us how that affect our coastal areas. In this way, we'll be able to prepare and also to inform us timely actions that we need to take as operations, engineering operations. And also the surveillance will see us if there's anything been deteriorating. How do we need to change our the way we built our infrastructure to be more resilient? So now we have what we need from a monitoring perspective. And so this goes, of course, in a circle on to plan and to do and to learn. And we are always getting better at making sure that we have this monitoring aspect of it. So this is one area that already have been implemented when it comes through CFAS came in, the Disaster Mitigation and Adaptation Program. And it's been in the work. Like I say, it started a decade ago, and we've seen the result of it as we continue to work. So as I was listening to the 2 presentations, and then more things came to mind in the sense that what we do on a daily basis So of course we deal on the snow issue, we deal on the flooding issue, but I want to, my presentation is again a little bit of a bigger picture on how do we address those bigger pictures. So that's one, through the adaptation and mitigation. The other one is through the climate change action strategy. So this is our roadmap to a zero carbon resilient city in 2015. So when it comes to our environment, no doubt we've seen that it's hotter, it's drier weather, and at times very intense rain, and also the fires that are that have been happening. Those are something that we are seeing. And I previously mentioned that even by 2050, the forecast is the daytime highs will get higher, will be by 3.7 degrees. Those are serious things that it's going to happen or predicted to happen. And also there will, by 2050, there will be more intense rains, not as frequent, but intense rain for a shorter period of time that could cause issue with flooding. So in 2023, Surrey City Council approved our climate change action strategy. You can find it on our website. We have a dedicated website for it. And it outlines the actions that the city will take together with other level of governments and other partners to reach the targets adopted by the city. And two of the goals are the net zero, 100% reduction. They are also incorporated in our OCP. The CCAS also added the interim community emissions in this way to get us to where we need to be by 2050. And the overall strategy that been envisioned is that to take an integrated approach to both reduce carbon pollution and also reducing the risks and adapting to climate impacts. So that is where it is the mitigation aspect of it and adaptation aspect of it comes into play. So I have in here some examples of CCAS adaptation and resilience shifts, we call them. And again, this is all in our website that can be found. So we have in our CCAS adaptation and resilience shift, we have designed to design and manage city infrastructure to reduce climate risk and improve resilience. So what does that mean? That means that we have to update our risk hazard and do a vulnerability assessment. We need to implement climate resilient infrastructure and ecological management. And that becomes very important, not only design for today, but design an infrastructure that will last longer and also be resilient to any change in climate. Integrate climate adaptation in land use plan and regulations. This is where we'll update our land development regulations to protect people and property from climate risks. And the previous presentations talks about housing being essential, housing be protected to make sure that the people that are protected. So the one way of doing is through our land development regulations. And also to provide more green spaces. And we've seen that through the COVID time, the absolute necessity to have more green spaces and how to integrate that within our OCPs and NCPs. And to identify areas where they are prone to climate risk and look for opportunities to mitigate them. So where do we build our, where do we expand our areas to make sure that they are not an area that are risk to climate change. And also within the CCAS adaptation and resilience shifts, we look to advocate for and implement programs to accelerate affordable zero carbon resilience retrofits. And further to that, protect, manage, and restore ecosystem to improve ecological and climate resilience. something that we become more and more aware is that we could truly use the natural habitats as a resilience for many of the climate change that has been predicted to be. So those are some of the examples where CCAS, adaptation, and resilience shifts that we are going to implement as we work together with our partners. So what kind of specific actions do we have to address extreme heat? Those are some of the areas that we are focusing on. So the risk assessment, this is one of the quick starts that we have. So within our CCAS, because sometimes it could be overwhelmed by putting huge policies that doesn't have quick actions or quick starts that needed right away. But with CCAS, there are 35 quick starts that we can start on. So the one is the risk assessment. So this is, we do it again by updating the city's hazard risk assessment, land use planning. And within the CCAS, it's called, we have the shifts that we have in our policies and programs. This will allow us to provide the more green space and ecological services. City lands, again, design and retrofit neighborhoods with green and inclusive public spaces that improve climate resilience. That's how we have started to do that right now. How do we integrate green infrastructure, rain gardens, and street trees as a core element of complete streets to support how to combat this extreme heat? And we are implementing this in our designs today to make sure that we are combating the extreme heat. Ensure that new civic facilities, vehicles, and other assets are zero carbon and designed for climate resilience. So you know what I mean now, like when we're going through those quick starts, those are something that could be done now. You don't have to wait. And also, when it comes to preparation of energy transition, that is to prioritize and implement opportunities to improve energy efficiency and phase out fossil fuel combustion across all city facilities. And this will help us as we change our fleets to make sure that we look into areas where there are less emission. In emergency preparedness, we are continually updating our emergency management programs and resources to enhance community resilience and community-related extreme weather events. So that is when the event of extreme weather happens, extreme heat, to make sure that we have all the tools that we need to help our residents. So spoke about updating land use plan and regulations. That includes the city's official community plan, zoning bylaw, and other plans, and all of that to support in creating more of the 15-minute neighborhoods so that we are less reliant on vehicle transportations per se. When it comes to within the CCAS, there is an area for tree canopy. This is where we apply leading standards and practices to plant and maintain structurally and biologically diverse, long-lived, healthy, and climate-resilient trees in parks and street boulevards, and explore opportunity to encourage retaining and planting trees on private lands. When it comes to new construction, this is where we will, in the process of updating city policies and bylaws for new construction to rapidly phase out operational carbon pollution and improve energy efficiency and climate resilience. And the two previous presenters spoke about how important it is our buildings to be well ventilated and resilient. And we continue to advocate to senior levels of government and other agencies to increase capacity and growth in the resilient zero carbon building industry. and also advocate for and implement programs and policies to accelerate affordable zero carbon resilient retrofits. So those are the things that quick start actions that we have within our CCAS, and our council has supported this. It is something that we're working on as we work together to make sure that we are prepared as the climate is changing. Definitely, we're seeing it on our day-to-day lives. And as a city, as we also respond to those events, it becomes more evident. So those are the two areas that I want to share. What are we doing as a city? And of course, we have all the other stuff that we do when it comes to our biofuels, our district energies, and to always looking at ways to mitigate and also be part of the solution to make sure that the upcoming climate change has less effect on our residents. Thank you.
Thank you so much to all of our speakers. So everyone, I just wanted to provide an opportunity for all of you to provide any questions or comments as it relates to extreme weather. Are there any advocacy, government advocacy components that you think we should all focus on to keep the economy moving? And so I'm going to start off with some questions, but if you do have a comment, please raise your hand and I'll identify you. So I just wanted to ask the city of Surrey, so we may have snow tonight. How do we keep the economy moving in the face of a weather announcement like that? How do we prepare businesses? How do we prepare residents?
Yeah, tonight's snow is a good example because many might not have expected it, but we are always in the forefront of it in the sense that we're looking at it 2 days ahead of time, what's happening. And we keep update our through our different social medias on what's happening. And of course, we have different priority when we do our snow clearing. We have a snow track in that system that we have. The businesses and residents can look at it. And we've been successful in making sure that we plan for events as such and to be ahead of it for snow clearing. And so keeping business and residents up to date with different social media and our website. That's one way to make sure that business continue to function.
Any other comments? So tell us about, again, to the city of...
Great presentations, by the way, really appreciated. This question is sort of sudden snow or sudden extremes. How do you actually right-size your own infrastructure to deal with that? Because it seems that you have a certain number of trucks. How do you disperse those across Surrey to make sure they're operating in the best places? Or most important places?
Yeah, so good point, because to your point, we have so many trucks for the city. So ahead of time, we plan our route, and we run our model to make sure that the efficient way of doing the routes. So we have priorities. So we have priority 1, 2, and 3. Of course, the main arterial roads and the main collectors roads being priority 1. And that's where most of our businesses are. And so we make sure those are looked after. And then after that, we go to second priority and third priorities. And the other thing that we do is, because in our areas, maybe the winter is about a month and a half. Also, how do we make sure that the resources we have, it's well used? So the vehicles that we have, they are fitted with snow plows or sanders or briners. But during the period that's no snow, they are also used to do construction work and all of that. So in this way, we don't have just like an equipment sitting aside and doing nothing all other time. And so there's a lot of planning that needs to be done. The same thing with our human resources in that aspect. But we plan our roads in such a way that the most efficient way to address snow. And we usually meet during the winter period. Every day there is a core group that meets to see the forecast, what's happening 2-3 days ahead of time. And then we tighten as a day comes beforehand and to see where to dispatch. And we have about 500 cameras that we monitor our area so we could send them more problematic area and more help they need and live and to communicate with the snow drivers.
Thank you very much for the presentation. To boost our economy in terms of a period like this, and most of them spending the time traveling to the office. So why don't we come up with some kind of policy, like in case of snow weather like this, how people have to stay at home and work, and also give a clear instruction to the management of the offices and corporates. So you can come up with some strict policy to work from home because people are traveling with the snow and they make a lot of accident as well. You can see the insurance, the claim rate is goes up. You can also control that. And time management. People are spending more time, they're stuck somewhere and they could not able to do what they want to do. And can you talk about that as well?
So I can't really talk too much in the sense that what to tell businesses whether to work from home or not, but every time that there is a snow event, we say that if it is not essential traveling, do not travel. Nowadays, there is a lot of provisions from working from home. I know companies deal with that, but we do say from time to time when there is snow events that unless there is essential travel, and this way, the roads are available for those good transportation of goods, all the necessity that needs to be on the roads. But then the bigger picture of it, how to mandate that's left in a different level of government, not with the city.
If I could add, I think as well what you're talking about, or I guess how I understand what you're talking about is actually a change of culture. I'm not sure that it's a policy, up for the city of Surrey, but part of that could be. But I also think it's a change of culture of what we deem as essential and critical, but also coming back to sort of stats where the Vancouver region spends the least amount on snow removal. Calgary actually spends very little on snow removal. There's a lot of snow in Calgary. My family lives in Alberta, but people get on with it. Why? Because people know how to live with the snow. Snow is common. People know how to drive in the snow. They have tires that can drive in the snow. And also there's an understanding of what's essential and what's not, what in terms of travel. And that's a culture that exists in that region. Where my parents live in the Rockies, their residential street does not get plowed. People still get out, people still function, because there's a culture, there's an education, there's a knowledge, there's practices and behaviors that are appropriate to the place where they are. And maybe I think this bigger conversation is what practices, cultures, habitats do we need to adapt to here for our changing weather patterns? So I think there are things that policy can do, but I also think there's a lot that we can do that we're not doing. We're expecting business as usual when it snows. We probably shouldn't be. We should be changing what we're doing. We should be working from home. We should be leaving the roads for essential services, but also maybe some of us need to learn how to drive in the snow. Some of us need to accept that we need to get winter tires. Some of us need to change our own expectations of things. When planes are landed in Eastern Canada, everyone goes, it happens. A couple years ago, over Christmas holidays, when a bunch of planes were landing, it was chaos. People were so mad. When you're used to it, it becomes part of your life to live with those ebbs and flows. We're not used to those here. So I think that's a big part of it as well, is maybe, again, having those conversations, really changing the dialogue around what we expect and how we prepare.
indeed, because there are a lot of immigrants here. We need to educate them as well. That's very important. It's part of our service.
Other,
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm glad I came here. Like, it was really good presentation from all three of you. Like, I've been licensed builder for the last 20 years. I've been part of tech committee for the last 15 years with the Homewood Builder Association. So I met a lot of people, building scientists and environmentalists during that time. So I've been adopting, I tried to work with Build Green. I was building custom homes. That didn't really work together. Like, people had money to spend. They didn't want to look at that. So I've been adopted heat recovery ventilation. In 2011, I put insulation outside, and like, I knew people had money. I forced them to adopt these things to make these changes. But I had hard time working with any city, like I worked in many municipalities. So now I got joined my wife in the real estate. Like, I'm a CCIM certified commercial realtor. That then look at the numbers, like how it makes sense at the end. So I've been still passionately studying into energy efficiency. I'm a certified passive home consultant. So I go to all these building reforms in the city on the other side. I see this thing as a disaster. Like, we have to build the right homes right now. And the way we are working, it's not gonna cut it, like, if we don't make major changes. So I see the builders on the bottom, like, they are the one who are taking all the risk. So they can put all these regulations and put more money into building. The consumer is not ready to spend that money. They are not educated. So we can, once we force these steps, like, we should be providing builders with, like, extra money so they can build these homes to higher level, although reduce the risk if the consumer is not ready to buy. Because if they don't do it, like, then we're stuck with these buildings for the next 50, 60 years again, trying to retrofit them. So I've been, like, I had a project in Abbotsford. Like, I sat there, I said, when I started the rezoning, my beard was all black, like, it's all white now. So the thing is, they said there's limitation, like the bylaws, everything, there's so many limitations. Then we had a project with the city of Surrey. We put stop to it because like, one thing of it, I want to make energy efficient building, and I'm telling, like, this design, this bylaws don't work. Like, they're telling me to put 3 small buildings. I said it's not efficient. Like, I want to build efficient building. And so there's a lot of we said let's hold on it onto it. Like, there's a lot of changes that are happening right now. Right? So I'm just saying, like, sorry I have to leave soon, but there's something we need to do. Is a disasters coming our way, like a COVID, like, we all need to work together. So we need to kind of involve people in manner, like, then everybody can contribute and work on it, rather than forcing rules here and there and people don't understand the problem.
any comments?
Yeah. I appreciate that comment, and that you've been working so hard to bring this attention. I have a heat pump installer who tried to put a heat pump in my house when I first moved here in 2010, and I looked at him like, are you crazy? I'm not putting that thing in my house. But he knew, early on, this is feasible and this is what we should be doing. And now he is, I promise you, you've seen his commercials at CCS, and he is all over the place because he's one of the leading installers. I think I want to come back to the codes and standards. The onus right now is on folks like you who have to explain and have to defend, this is why you want this. This makes your home better, makes your comfort better. And then, but that value isn't coming out yet in real estate. People aren't thinking about, oh, I could, there's the energy cost savings, but it's I can be comfortable in my home. I can be safe in my home during these extreme weather events. And this is actually why we're saying, if we're thinking about retrofitting homes, and if we're talking about building higher quality homes, we need to be thinking about these as multi-dimensional benefits. We have to stop thinking about resilience, about people's health, people's safety as co-benefits. I call them non-energy benefits because they're the pie. Energy benefits are the slice. Energy benefits are actually BC Hydro's problem and Fortis BC's problem because they're the ones who have to figure out how we're going to provide this, low carbon energy to power our future by 2050. So we do argue for the program that Fortis runs, their deep retrofit program, they're trying to figure out, okay, what does this mean? How much energy efficiency do we need to reach those low carbon limits? And so what is possible? And then, so back to the codes for a second here, we can get some resistance to them because of that, that argument that there's this affordability issue. But I want to turn the question around to affordable for who? And when. People who need to heat those homes, we've got something like 18 to 20% of Canadians live with energy poverty. And those are both low income and middle income people. This is, in all types of housing. So we need to be thinking about those folks. Let's put them ahead and let's actually just fund zero cost retrofits. Fix those houses. They're often old. They're usually the most affordable to rent. And they're the ones that people have lived in for a really long time, that we need to keep that stock. But it's actually often also kind of low-rise buildings that we're not replacing. And so it's a depleting stock that we desperately need to protect. So the codes give a bit of certainty. That's how Energy Step Code got so much attention, is that now the industry goes, okay, by this year, this is where we're expected to be. By this year, this is what we're expected to be. And it's that standard now. Now we don't have the lowest common denominator as being what people expect to have to pay for. There is another dimension to it that is being explored by places like Edmonton, and it's like, how much of square footage can you actually sort of shave off? Well, nobody would probably notice that their bedroom was a half a square foot shorter in each on each side. How much can you shave off before you can actually reach those higher performance metrics? But I want to hear from folks like you. We're trying to differentiate what are the challenges the actual builders and developers working through versus what are the systemic challenges that are standing in front of them, and where they're like, I can't work in that context, and sort of there's this resistance that's not reflecting what they're capable of, that's actually just reflecting the system that they're trying to work within.
I've got two things to sort of add to that. One, I think really off to Betsy's point of really thinking about, I think, the affordable for whom, I think is really important to think about. And I like to think about it in terms of a time frame. We tend to focus on the price of the house, to purchase it right now, but we don't focus on the price to maintain that home, to heat and cool that home, to power that home. We're not thinking about that cost. That cost isn't part of that conversation, as you're saying, like, consumers and purchasers, that's not where the head is thinking, is how much is the dollar value to get in the door, not once you're in the door, what happens. And I think electric vehicles has gone much further in sort of working through what that means. There's calculators online now where you can look at the price of a regular sort of fossil fuel powered car or an electric car. You can go, oh man, this car is $20,000 more expensive. However, these calculators help you figure out how much fuel you'd have to sort of spend, all these different things that go into it. And then after X amount of years, that electric vehicle is actually a better deal. We're not having those conversations around our homes or other types of commercial buildings. We're just going, how much is it to either rent or buy, but not maintain? So if we're building better homes, they are going to be cheaper to heat and cool. And we might be able to build in some more efficiencies throughout the system again to support more affordable life, not just that sort of housing, and thinking about all those other not co-benefits, but again, the sort of all the things that come out of that. So I think we might have something to learn from electric vehicle sort of public education promotion sort of spaces there, because I feel like that's now part of how people are thinking about their choices in vehicles, but we're not there with homes, we're not there with buildings. And I think that's an opportunity as well to think about that, the longer term cost. Yes, go ahead.
There's not many people they're going to come forward with the idea of taking this all upon themselves and building the way we want to build. So I think if someone comes along, like we have to have all the people on the table, because you cannot go through the additional bylaws and figure those things out. You need to all sit down and see if that project makes sense. And that can be a model for the city to show to other people how it can be done.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, Edmonton's been running a really cool program where essentially you just get accelerated, and they'll work with you to make sure that you are hitting all those marks. And so, you know, much more supportive of those.
There's a lot of information like not readily available. You still need to dig down.
Yeah, as I said, I'm a building science engineer, and like trying to figure out how to get somebody in to make my post and beam house on the North Shore, you know, somewhat better than it is, it has been impossible. So, yeah. The other question I kind of would love to kind of follow up with people, particularly if you're asset owners, is how do you engage with the industry? So speaking to this culture shift, we tend to reach out when our furnace or our boiler fails, right? That's too late to be planning for, say, a heat pump. And so asset managers can really kind of lead on this, where they go, okay, this is where we want to go. And as they say, what we need to see is phased in, well-planned retrofits, where as those components phase out, you know, you don't just put new siding on over top of the crummy old insulation and tar paper. You know, you integrate your insulation, but you also have to add ventilation if you're going to seal that building and add insulation. And these things actually need to be well planned out.
That's why when I look at all the different programs, I found that passive home was the one who addresses everything. Like once you're passive home certified,
Yeah.
cover all the bases, right?
Yeah, RMI, which used to be called the Rocky Mountain Institute, they had a really cool program called Zero Overtime, and it was something like that. What I was saying, it was like this well-planned, you know, zero emissions overtime retrofit plan, and it starts to sort of gives you this checklist over time to plan for it. And that needs to be integrated in, like, you know, the reserve funding regulations that require, say, stratas to plan for the same energy reduction targets and carbon reduction targets that we're all in theory supposed to be planning. Yeah, these are big picture policies that are hard to get politicians
We
to
need to do this more often. I think.
So we have 6 more minutes.
Sorry.
Are there any other questions?
So what is the buy-in from these large builders today?
Yeah, not a lot. I mean, I don't want to say that. What I want to say is, one, people are fearful of change, and the other differentiation that I would say between energy step code and zero carbon step code, if you remember the evolution of it, and this is speaking as a transplant around it when it was all happening, but as my understanding was, people were frustrated. We're like 22 municipalities or something right here in this very small area, and a builder would cross the street and all of a sudden they were entirely different bylaws or entirely different rules. They wanted standardization. And so back to these tiered codes, give them that standardization. And the Energy Step Code was developed as a collaborative where industry was able to contribute to it. Zero Carbon Step Code was developed separately, and we're seeing like kind of a reflexive resistance to it. And I have to think that some of it was in the way, in the process that, where it was developed. But to my earlier point, I think we really do need to differentiate what are they resisting to? Are they the systemic barriers that are in front of them because there's not enough, you know, the electricity vault needs to be upgraded for $1 million and that building can't take responsibility for it? Why aren't we thinking, okay, this neighborhood, we're gonna, you know, up the electricity capacity for this neighborhood and start to move it into like an electrically powered community, so that this is like on the onus of the utility at a neighborhood scale, not on the onus of the loss leading building developer and retrofitter, for example. So we need to separate which issues are in their control, because I think we'll find they already know how to do this. We're not talking about anything that's any different than when I was in school 30 plus years ago. That's what's so striking about this. They know how to do this.
Hi. Thank you. My name is Stephen, and several of the speakers were mentioning over and over about electricity and electrical demands and all those things, and we're province-wide, we're in a very challenging situation, as you all know. That supply is very restricted. So I was wondering if any of the panelists had looked into dome concrete buildings. Okay, so
I mean, none of us are technical people. Granted, I did this 30 years ago,
so
but
I would suggest that you do some research into those.
Dome concrete buildings?
Basically, they're inflated buildings and they're sprayed with foam and rebar and concrete top. But these are buildings that are gaining more and more popularity, particularly in California. And they have incredible strengths. Some of the strengths is that they are less costly to build. And they also, it's dramatic electrical reduction or energy reduction needs. They can withstand, firestorms. They can go through a firestorm. Rain also. These are so I just would encourage you to look into those and to see what's happening, particularly in California, and what they're doing with these things.
Yeah, interestingly, like the way that we even kind of the way that our contracting works, it is not set up for people to take risks. Right? The onus is all on the contractor, as opposed to, giving a kind of a play space, which is actually what our Reframed lab did, is it gave this like 6 months of people being able to talk to each other on lifetime real projects. And like the mechanical engineers were so excited because they could totally nerd out and they felt like they were back in school. We don't open that kind of innovation, and the way that the risk is distributed and the way that, responsibility for the projects is distributed, it doesn't allow for creativity in that sense.
So in the city, those particular structures may not be valid, but particularly in the province and rural communities, they would thrive. But just put it on your radar, something to look into.
Thank you.
Especially
Any final comments from our panelists? Please.
I think somebody had mentioned about education, and that's so important that within policy by itself is not good, and to make sure that to educate. Now we have many ways of doing this through social media, but one thing maybe miss is that visiting schools, because when you educate the younger ones and they get excited, they go home and talk to their parents, and having those community events. We throughout the years that to bring this to the forefront, what kind of policies that we're changing, the reason why, and then being partners with different entities like BC Hydro and Fortis and all of that. I think that will shift the way we look at things, because unfortunately sometimes we just look at it, what's the cost now, not what the cost will be in a few years if we do not do the change that we need to do.
Just picking up on your thinking about education, it's reminding me, we did a study on sort of a supply chain analysis in terms of the industry's readiness for deep retrofits and accelerating them and getting ready for that. And the top two issues were not finding labor or bodies to work. It was trained labor that's the hardest thing. So we just need to be prioritizing this and getting people trained in high performance building, construction and retrofits as the new standard. And then the second one is that lack of demand. And they specifically pointed out we need regulations that just remove the question of whether it should be done. It just needs done.
I'm good.
Okay.
I feel like they've been wrapped up.
All right. Well, again, a round of applause to our panelists. And thank you so much for attending. The conversation, I am sure, is going to continue. And if you have any comments or anything like that, please let us know. The PowerPoints are on our website at businessinsurrey.com. Thank you. Making a great decision.